All right, so there's one thing we're gonna do that's gonna help the animator a lot to work with the rig, and you can see this as part of the feedback that you might get from the animators once you deliver a finished rig. It'll happen very often that you deliver a rig to the animators and it's not going to behave exactly the way they need it. There might be some changes to do, some controls to add, stuff like that. So let's assume, for the purpose of this exercise, that that's what happened. You sent the rig to the animators, and then the animators said, you know what? Sorry. Um, the rig is great, but we can't snap from the IK to the FK rig or vice versa, and we need to do that. So the thing is, we've built a rig that can blend from IK to FK using these controls that we created, right? So you can go from FK to IK and blend in between. This is great when the poses between both systems are different. However, there might be times where you really need to have one system take the exact pose of the other. And that's very useful for transitions where you want to see no movement at all on the character. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to create a system that will allow us to snap both together. So for example, let's say that the character is being animated with FK. In this case, let's take, for example, the arms. They're being animated with FK, but then at some point the character has to lean on a table or something, and then the animator needs to switch to IK, but without seeing any movement in the character's arm. So to do that by hand would be rather difficult. So what we're going to do is create a way that will allow the animator to just match certain positions or rotations on some helpers that we're going to create, helper locators, and that's going to match one system to the other. Sorry. And we're going to create two little rigs of these on each limb. So you can, one is going to be meant to go to match the IK to the FK controls, and the other one is going to be meant to go the other way around. So let's see how we're going to go about that. Let's work on the right arm. So I'm going to hide all the rest just to not be distracted by it. There we go. Pardon me. And let's expand our hierarchy. So we have our arm IK controls, FK controls, and here we have the rest of the system, blending arm, and all that stuff. So we're going to create our snapping rigs as part of the arm limb. So that way it becomes part of this, let's call it module, and we can reuse it later on if we have the infrastructure to do so. So I'm going to start by creating a new group locator over here, and I'm going to drop it inside of the arm group, and let's reset all of its transforms so it's going to move right there to where the arm group actually is. And let's rename it to group right arm snapping rigs. Okay, and let's duplicate it twice, and let's take duplicates and drop them inside of this, and we're gonna call the first one arm snapping IK to FK, and the second one it's gonna be FK to IK. Okay, you don't really need two groups. I just do this to avoid confusion on my part, because things can get confusing rather quickly. And let's go to our groups tab and unhide the hidden group, because we're gonna need to have access to some stuff in there. So there we go. All right, so now that we have this, let's start creating the items we're gonna need. We're gonna start with the arm snapping from the IK to the FK. This means that we're going to need certain items that we are going to snap our up vector control and I'm sorry, our main arm control too. Okay, so oh, and we also need a clavicle, so I'm gonna need the torso over here. This is gonna be part of the torso snapping. So let's, well, we're gonna create the torso one later. Let's start with the just the arm controls. So I'm gonna create a locator, and let's bring it into our group over here. Let's duplicate it once. So we're gonna call this one locator right upper arm snap, and it's gonna be IK to FK. Well, let's just call them upper arm snap. We'll see later on if we need to change the name based on what we're gonna do in the next group. Lower arm snap. Okay, so let's start with the upper arm. So what this guy is going to do is going to allow us to snap the upper arm control, as you can see. So let's set our drop action to match, and we're gonna match it over to this control right here. Okay, and we're gonna take the lower arm and match it over to this guy. Okay, so we have currently the positions for both controls, but what we want to do is these guys need to follow the FK hierarchy so that the IK can snap to these, and it always will be the proper position. So obviously this guy needs to be dynamically parented to the upper arm. Okay, and this guy over here needs to be dynamically parented to the lower arm. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. We can see our targets are moving with the FK rig, so that's great. Let's give them some a nicer appearance. Let's see, let's select both, and let's turn these guys into circles. We're gonna align them to the view, and let's make them smaller. Kind of like that. Let's see how that works. All right, so we're gonna do a little test with them. Okay, let's go to a frame where the FK arm is doing something like this one right here. So what we're gonna do is the way this works is if the animator wants to match this exact pose in IK, we grab our IK control and we drag and drop it onto this match control over here, and then we grab this one and we match it over there, and as you can see, we've got a pretty good match right there. Okay, in this case I would just need to match the position, so I don't need to match the orientation, because it doesn't really matter, because those controls really affect in no way the character when they change their orientation, but or their rotation, but we'd say we'd actually want that to happen. And let's give them a different color. In this case, I'm going to make them into more or less a dark blue. Let's see how that reads in the viewport. Maybe a little bit lighter. I want to be able to tell that they are part of the FK system, but not really give them the same color as the FK controls, because then they can get lost a little bit too easily in the middle of all the other things that we're going to have in the viewports that that starts to look okay. I think maybe a little bit lighter. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it like that. Okay, so we're done with the IK to FK. Now we need to do the opposite. We need to go from FK to IK, okay? And for the purpose of this rig, because it's an FK rig, we need to match rotations instead of positions, because these guys only rotate, okay? So let's see how we can go about that. If we need to read rotations, we're going to need to read them directly from the IK arm. So let's go and find the IK arm and its joints. There they are. Okay, so we have the upper arm and we have the lower arm. So we need two locators that are going to be dynamically parented to these two guys. So let's create those. Create first locator, drag and drop them into the group. And one thing I should have done before dynamically parenting these guys would be to zero out their transforms. We don't really need to care too much about these because we're not going to move them manually. They're dynamically parented. We don't want to move them manually, but just in the name of cleanliness, I would have done that. But again, it's not a big deal. So let's now duplicate this guy. We're going to call the first one locator right. And this one is going to be locator right. Let's call this one. This one is going to be the shoulder. No, upper arm. Snap. I guess I will have to add the suffix FK to IK. I'm gonna add it to these guys in a second. Locator right, lower arm snap, FK to IK. Since we're doing this, let's add it to these guys. IK to FK. And this guy, same thing. IK to FK. There we go. Okay. Now let's match them. In this case, we need to match over to. Let's hide the main arm. Well, I'm going to just let's see where the upper arm is. It's right there. Well, since I can't get to it in the viewport, I'm going to use the tools over here. So let's select the upper arm and the upper arm joint and say match and align item position and item rotation. So that takes care of this guy. And we'll do the same with this guy and this guy over here. Position, rotation. There we go. So now we have our two locators. And let's make sure that we have exactly the same orientation on the FK controls, which if we've been rigging carefully, we should, and we do. Because otherwise, when you match the rotations, well, you're going to run into some nasty offsets. So you want to have the same orientation, which in our case is Y up and Z pointing backwards. Okay, all right. So now we can dynamically parent them. Before I do so, I'm going to do what I should have done with the other guys. Zero everything. All right. Again, doesn't change much in terms of the workflow, but so let's take this guy and the upper arm. And we're going to go into setup, compensation, dynamic parent, and then the lower arm and the lower arm are IK, and add that as our dynamic parent. And let's give this a shot. If I move my control over here, yep, they seem to be tracking pretty well. So let's give them a different appearance. Well, before we do so, No, yeah, I'll do the appearance first so I can see how easy it is to actually match these guys. So let's go into display. We're also going to make them into circles. There we are, align to view. And we're going to give them, again, a sort of red-ish tint, this time leaning more towards orange. There we go. And let's see how our FK system can match them. Sorry. Let's move our IK arm a little bit into a different pose. Let's also move this guy. Okay, and now let's try matching the rotations. Okay, so we're gonna match this guy onto this guy. That seems to be fine. And let's now match this guy onto our next circle. And we've got a match. That's pretty good. Now there's one thing though. If I blend right now between the IK and the FK, you will see there's a shift right there. The reason is that, let's unhide the torso controls, that we have this auto clavicle weight thing, which means that the IK system is taking the auto clavicle into account. So we have a little shift there. But if we change the auto clavicle to 0, then the match, there's still a little bit of an offset there. Oh, it's because, well, obviously since I changed that, I need to rematch the upper arm. There we go. And also very likely the lower arm. So we're gonna take care of the auto clavicle when we get to the torso. And now the match is pretty close. We still have, oh, of course, we still have a little bit of weight on. I didn't turn it off completely. And it's because I need to be careful with my mouse movements. Anyway, I think you get the idea. I would need to rematch the rotations again, but we're going to take care of the FK clavicle so that, again, it follows this guy's auto clavicle weight behavior later on to make sure that our matches are actually precise. But for now, the system does work. So all I'll do is go ahead and create it on the other side of the character for the other arm, and that should take care of having the matching rig for both arms. So I'll just show it to you when we come back. Alright, I'm done with creating the snapping rig for the other arm. As you can see, they're right there. Here's the other circle, and here's the one up here. And everything is ready. I just duplicated the exact same setup, parenting them to dynamically parenting them to their corresponding items on the other side of the character. So let's see what that looks like. We can hide the hidden group, and that's what our character is looking like right now. There he is. Now, depending on what the animator is doing, he might not be needing this rig as often. So one thing we can do is, of course, add these items to a group so he can hide and unhide them at will. So let's do that. I'm just gonna select all these guys. By the way, I also fixed the transforms on these guys just by deleting the dynamic parenting, zeroing out their transforms, and dynamically parenting them again. So let's go back to groups. We have those 4 items selected. Let's say new groups. And let's call this A's snapping rig. Standard from selected items, we say OK. So that way, if the animator doesn't need them, he can just hide them and not be concerned about them blocking his view that much. Okay, and then when he needs to use them, he can unhide the group and do his snapping stuff, hide them again if he needs to. So we're gonna hide them because in the next video we're gonna work on the snapping rig for the torso. So let's check out this one. Okay, we're ready to work on the snapping rig for the clavicles of the character. And this rig is going to be a little bit more complicated and also a little bit more limited than the one we have on the arms, just because of how the auto clavicle behavior is set up. It's going to require the animator to do a bit of keyframing to get the blending from one system to another to really stick. And I don't think this is so much of a big deal, because when you snap from one system to the other, as an animator, you usually do it from one frame to the next. It's always something extremely fast, and you don't notice any difference at all. Because otherwise, if you are going to go for more than one frame, then you would probably just blend. And in that case, a blend that goes smoothly from one system to the other is a much better idea to have than just to snap. So it's not going to be too much of a problem, but I want you to be aware of some of the things that are going to be a little bit different between this setup and the previous one. And I'm going to show them to you when we get there. So we're going to start by, again, creating a group locator inside of the torso hierarchy, and let's call this one group center snapping rigs, and I'm gonna say clav, just for clavicles. Okay, and let's reset everything so it moves again onto the torso's group position. And let's start, for example, with the left side of the character. So the rig we're gonna create to snap the IK over to the FK rotation is going to be very simple. Let's create a locator, bring it in here, and let's call this guy locator left side snapping, and this is going to be the IK to the FK snapping clavicle. Okay, I think that's the let me check the arm snapping. Okay, that's the opposite. It's clavicle snapping, just to be consistent. All right, so we have the clavicle snapping from the IK to the FK, and let's duplicate that a few times. Then we're gonna have FK to IK. Then we're gonna have IK to FK, but for the right side, and same for the right side, FK to IK. Okay, we have our 4 locators. Let's start with this one. So how do we snap the IK to the FK? Well, we're just gonna take this locator, let's match it over to our friend over here, and we're going to dynamically parent it to the FK control. There we go. And I'm gonna give it a different shape. I'm gonna do it for both of them since we're at that. Let's see, we're gonna make him again into a circle. Kind of like there. Although it is going to overlap with the one for the arm. So to avoid that, let's move him up this is not the channel, it's going to be the Z axis. We're going to move them up to where the clavicle control actually is. So there you go. And let's make it a little bit smaller. Sorry. There, now we can match this guy over to this guy's position, and because he's going to be rotating with the clavicle control, we can match that. Okay. Let's see how this looks like. Of course, when we go to IK, this guy comes down, so we can match over here, and we get the same orientation. Now here's the interesting part. Because of how this setup works, you'll notice that if I go back to FK, then I get an additional transform right there. And it's because when we rigged this part of the character, we made it so that even if we were on FK mode, you could still use this guy to move the clavicle around. So you have both controls available to you. So what the animator needs to do is just make sure that he matches the clavicle when he is already in IK mode, and then he'll get a proper match from one frame to the next. And when he wants to match back to the FK, then he needs to set a keyframe over here, go to FK, and just rematch this guy to this guy and set the next keyframe. So that way it's gonna stick. So that's the thing about this setup and how it works. Okay, so I just want you to be aware of that. Let's reset our controls. Set this guy to 0, and everything is back to normal. Let's make sure of that. Okay, perfect. Good. So now we can match the IK to the FK. Let's now do the FK to the IK. So how does this need to match? We need to match this guy's rotations onto something, right? So let me start by matching this guy, the locator, over to the FK control. So we have exact positioning and orientation of the locator. I forgot to zero out this guy again. Let me do that very quickly. So let's parent it to the FK control. Let's get rid of that. Zero everything out, since we're at it for this guy too. And then just recreate the dynamic parenting. There we go. Done. All right. So let's move on to this guy. All right. So what is this guy going to be dynamically parented to? Well, you could say it needs to do something with this guy, because this guy is the one that is going to be controlling the clavicle when in FK mode. However, well, I cannot dynamically parent to this guy over here, because it's not going to just rotate. It could point at it, but then I could run into, I'm gonna have to set up vectors and stuff like that. So I can just see which parts of the clavicle are responding to this guy's movement, and you could infer that maybe it's one of the joints or something. But actually, since we need to take into account the AutoClavicle behavior, let's take a look in here in the clavicle workspace to see what's going on. It looks like this guy came in, I don't know how, but let's get rid of it. Let's look at the clavicle setup. So we have our clavicle reference and aim, some rotation constraints, and everything goes into this clavicle blend node, which is actually the item that is blending with the AutoClavicle behavior. Okay, this is the one that gets controlled by the AutoClavicle. So this is the one we need to constrain onto. So let's take our locator, this guy, and set up on compensation and add parent, and we're done. So let's see what that does. Let's first go into IK mode. There we are. Let's move our clavicle up like that. Okay, and you can see now we have the clavicle pointing that way. So let's take the FK and say match rotation, and let's match it to this locator, and it matches. Okay, again, you're gonna need to set a keyframe on this guy, because when we go back to FK mode, we're gonna have that, and you need to match it back down again. Okay, it's because it's sort of inheriting the rotations of the FK clavicle. That's why you get this double thing. I guess that if the animator doesn't like it, you could, as an exercise, decouple this guy from the FK's setup. I'm sure that if you go back and watch the rigging videos for the clavicle of the character, you're going to be able to figure out how to do that with no problems at all. But right now, this is how it works. So let's zero out everything again. Let's take this guy. Well, we need to do first the FK clavicle, because this guy depends on that one. Reset its rotations. And now for this guy, I think he's already, yeah, reset position. There we go. And everything is back to normal. Now let's give this guy, and of course the next one, a different appearance. And again, we're gonna make them circles. Circle, solid, and let's make them like kind of like that, big. But over there it can get a bit confusing. Let's take a look. Let's hide the hidden group, see what it looks like. Yeah, I'm gonna move it a little bit to the right. So somewhere over there. Okay, there we are. And let's color them properly. So let's see, what color was I using for the arm ones? Let's unhide the snapping rigs, and because the arm is hidden, there you go. So this one right here is FK to IK, and this one is IK to FK, so it needs to be this orange color, the FK to IK, which is 5607. So let's color them that way. Sorry. And the other one, it's gonna be for these guys. There we go. There they are. And now all I need to do is work on the clavicle for the other side, and I'm going to be done. So I'm gonna pause this for a second and come back when I've rigged the other clavicle. Okay, I'm done. As you can see, we have the same controls on this side of the character, and they are following pretty well. So we have that snapping rig also working. All that is left is to take these guys these four guys and add them to the snapping rig group. All right. And one other thing that we definitely want to do is let's select all the items in this group. I'm gonna hide the other arm so just that you can see it. They're selected over there. And I'm going to select all of their channels. And I am going to add them to the lock group, to the locked channels group right there, because we don't want these transforms to be used by the animator at all. So let's add those channels, and now when I select one of these guys, let's take a look. Yeah, all of the transforms are unavailable, and all the transform manipulators are also grayed out. So there's no way that the animator can move these out of position. They're just there to be used as reference. So we are now done with the upper part of the character. Now let's take a look at how we're gonna work on the snapping for the legs. Sorry, for the legs. Okay, I've gone ahead and I've created the snapping rig for the legs. As you can see, it's already done. I didn't do this one with the recording because, well, it's pretty much the same procedure that we use for the arm. You already know how to do that one, and so instead of just spending more time repeating the same things, I basically created the rig for you. And as you can see, we have here our snapping objects, and they're constrained to their corresponding elements in the rig, which are some to the FK joints, well, the controls actually, and others to the IK joints. So it's the same as the arm. Now, the only exception is with the feet. There's no snapping rig for the feet here yet, and that's because that's going to involve a little bit more work due to how the IK foot is set up with all the roll controls and stuff like that. So it is possible to make one, of course. It just needs to take into account some of the extra controls that we have, and the animator will probably have to zero those out for the snapping to work properly. So in this case, what I'm going to do actually is leave you that one as an exercise. If you want to investigate how to create a rig that would allow you to snap the FK foot to the IK and vice versa, give it a shot, and you can try to see how far you can get it to go. For this part of the character, I think we're done. I've already actually added these items to the groups we had. So we have our where are they? Here they are, the snapping rig group. Now it has those items as well, and I've also added their channels to the locked channels group. So that's all done. I think we can move on to the rest of the character, and we're actually pretty close to finishing this course, so let's not lose more time and just get to it.